Good afternoon, everybody. It's 12:30 and it's a good behavior to start on time. So thank you, everyone who has already been calling in. Today we will be having an interactive workshop, a virtual workshop if you want, as we're all on different places, on ideal behavior and on the link between behaviors and operational excellence, enterprise excellence. Just in 1 minute to give us some background, Lotte and I are from Möbius, and we are a consulting organization that helps organizations implement strategy. And in that respect, we're also an affiliate of the Shingo Institute, and for those who know, Shingo is the most renowned framework on enterprise excellence worldwide. Some would say that the Shingo Prize is the Nobel Prize for operational excellence. That's also why, and we will come back on this later, we have chosen to represent them here in Europe. Okay. I am Gert, I'm speaking, and next to me is Lotte. We prepared this webinar together with our colleagues. In very short, we're both very passionate about enterprise excellence, continuous improvement, and I think that's the most important thing to know as we will share the slides. Some practicalities, this will be surely a question, is one, the webinar will be recorded and shared afterwards. And there is an important practicality to know. During the session, we will make active use of this. You can raise your hand via the GoToWebinar tool to answer on a question, or to mention that you have an issue or a question that cannot wait until the Q&A at the end. So please have a look at the right above angle of your screen, because there you should see the icons that are on the screen, and in 10 seconds I will ask you first time to use it to see if everything is clear, as this is in fact the between brackets title of the webinar today, which is when you chop up the elephant ... and then to a holistic approach for implementing operational excellence. My first question, this is just a test to see if the hand raising works, is who does know the expression chopping up the elephant? Please raise your hand via the tool if you do. I'm looking at Lotte and she sees that it's clear for a lot of persons. Not everyone. So if you know this expression, please raise your hand, and to be sure it's on the technicalities. If you don't know the expression, please also raise your hand, then we have an idea if everything is working. Yes, Lotte is nodding, so let's go then for the content, because that's what you're here for. Watch out, this is an interactive webinar. What is important, I hope everyone has his smartphone next to him or her, is that you go to the web browser on your smartphone and that you surf to slido.com. Slido.com is a website, is a tool, and a web tool we will be using to stimulate interactivity. When you've done it, enter the event code Möbius without the umlaut. And if you have done that, please fill in your name and surname. Okay, this is an important prerequisite to be able to ask some polling questions and to ask you some input on defining ideal behaviors. So surfing to slido.com, entering the event code Möbius and filling in your name and surname. Okay. I'll wait for some seconds before everyone has had the chance, and then we will have a test question to see for how many people this worked. This is quite important, so it will be the heart of what we are doing today. So let's test if this works. A test statement. How long have you been in the industry as a person? Industry as, let's say, a sector. How long have you been around? I see 7 people already answering. Most of you 5 to 10 years. Or most of the younger people have been able to enter Slido, which is also a possibility. I see 9 people having logged in. I think that we're around, how many people are there?
That's 17.
17, so that means half of you has already managed, so I'm waiting for a bit more. So please log in and then fill in this test question, and we can directly visually see how many people have been logged in. Okay. I see 10 people there. That was my mental benchmark to go further. So please, for everyone, please enter so slido.com, Mobius, and fill in your name and surname, and I will be able to answer our questions. Okay, let's go to the reason why we're here today. There is something bizarre going on. In fact, operational excellence in one or another form has been around for 60 to 70 years. Still, research shows that the successful implementation rate is extremely low. It depends a bit on the research, but you get answers between 5%, often 10%, and some say 30%. But most say only 10% are successful, and successful means sustainably improving over time. And this is an example on the slide where you see a New Zealandic program where 11 companies started, which were followed over more than 8 years, and in this case, only one was been able to sustain it. It's one example, but there are several, so this is not an isolated one, but this is the key question we are all struggling with. In fact, the theory is known, the tools are known, or should be known, because they're around for decades, and still it's difficult to manage a successful implementation. Okay, then a concrete question for you. If we ask you as a person, what is, according to you, the most important reason these implementations fail? You can answer it via Slido, and it will appear on the screen. So the most important reason those excellence implementations fail. There is no right or wrong answer. We're just asking for your input here. I see lack of vision appearing, lack of a performance culture, belief and support of middle management, no more focus from top management, okay, lack of belief, lack of commitment, top management. I'm then of course wondering if there is a top manager in the room who can answer us, because apparently management is the big wrongdoer here. If I hear culture not established on the floor, management jumping too fast to next hot project. Okay, other reasons?
Someone via GoToWebinar afraid about changes.
We see an answer via GoToWebinar, afraid of change. Okay. Change management. I would think that this means a lack of change management then. Okay. It are only a few examples, but we have done this workshop with hundreds of people before, and what is bizarre here is that only human between bracket behavior related answers come to this question. So we very often see that programs are focused on project management, on tooling, on ways of let's say timelines, planning, trying to get new behaviors into our daily work. And the bizarre thing here is that all of the reasons for failure are linked to our focus or belief or culture as we name it. And it was indeed, I think that's close to what research said. If you take back the same research as before, then you see here, of the reasons that were researched is lack of change strategy was number 1. The erroneous understanding of lean was 2. It was in this case a lean program. So that's on the more on the belief and on knowledge. And then last, third place was lack of senior management commitment. So indeed, the gut feeling you just showed is similar to what the research has shown. Then now the important question, of course, is that it's very nice to see, and everyone has heard about those stories why things are not succeeding, or has heard consultants tell how we should do it. But what is the key to realize a successful implementation? We're going to go through 4 stories to come to what, according to us and according to Shingo, is the key to a successful implementation. And the first one goes via the first statement. And the first statement says, every individual in my organization can explain how his or her job adds value to the customer. So each individual, if this is fully true, you give us a 5. If this is fully untrue or not at all, you give us a 1 or somewhere in between. The question is if every individual in your organization can explain how his or her job adds value to the customer. Okay, we see some people giving a 2 and a 3, most of you. 2 persons saying 4 or 5. Yes, this is the case in our organization. Okay. Yeah. Someone says this is not at all the case in my organization. This is in fact a histogram we often see. We very often see somewhere in the middle. Some people can do, some do not, and a bit skewed to the left. So more often not than this is the case. There has been done research around the world with more than 25 million people, and which states that only 7% of people feel really committed to their job. And this is partly due to the fact that how we design jobs, and one of the main reasons there is exactly this one. How do you feel in your daily job the link with adding value to the customer, which is one of the prime motivators for being committed in the organization. And an interesting story was when 2 or 3 years ago, Lotte and I were visiting a plant at Boston Scientific, and we were there on a Gamma training. And it was our training to learn to ask the right questions at the Gamma, to learn to read or to make objective how a culture looks like. And we were talking to people working there, and it was a plant where they make stents. And so for the heart, in case you have a blockage of the arteries in your heart, you can have a small balloon, a stent, to be able to free it up again. And so these are very small things to be assembled, and it looks like an assembly line, but without things moving. So the product is moving, not the persons. And there were a lot of women working there due to the fact that it's very fine work, let's say. And I was talking to the first lady on the assembly line, and I asked her who she was, what she was doing, and so on. It was a very nice conversation. I asked her at a certain point in time, why do you think is your job important? And she said, she didn't hesitate at all. She said, there are 2 fundamental reasons why my job is very important. First, I'm the first one in the assembly line, she said, and everyone is working further on the work and the quality I have created. So if I'm not doing well, then the rest of the work is in fact not adding value anymore because it's a wrong product. And secondly, she said, and she showed me a small bolt on the stand, she said, this is an extremely important part to be assembled. If this gets loose in the heart of the patient, he might die or he might be severely injured. And I asked her, how in God's name do you know this? And she said, each year we are asked to go and operate together with the surgeon to bring in the stents in the heart of the patients, so that everybody at each point in time, how repetitive the work can be, we always know how important it is that we deliver quality during assembly. And this was for me a very strong story about understanding what it means to how do you create value for, in this case, the patient, and how management made sure that everyone was aware of that at each point in time. Okay, let's go over to a second statement. And the second statement is, for each large improvement project in your organization, how many small improvements are implemented? Of course, to be able to calculate this, one has to know the number of large improvement projects as well as the number of small improvements. If it's easier to, let's say, to name your site or your department or and so on, can also be the case. But how many small improvements are implemented for every large improvement project? Most of you are saying 10, some say 100, one person says 1,000. We already have 11 answers. That one person is probably working at Toyota, because that's in fact where this informal benchmark comes from. When we were in Japan, we got this as a very clear message. The reason why the people in Japan gave us the advice why they thought that implementations were often not working is due to the fact that we see improvement too much as a large improvement project, while in fact the small daily improvements are the ones that create a sustaining culture. And to show this a very good example, when we were at Barco's, you might know Barco, designers and builders of those high-end projectors. And we were doing a Gemma walk in the logistics department where they sent the projectors to end customers. And one of the operators had asked at a certain point in time, why are we sending only one projector on one air freight pallet? Because in fact, I think that we can do 2 or maybe 4 per air freight pallet. And for those who often use air freight, they know that it's a quite expensive way of transporting. So they asked around and they wondered why wouldn't we put more on one air freight pallet? And after searching for a week, there was no reason was found. So they said, okay, let's test it then. And they tested it, and apparently there were no restrictions on weight nor on volume or on length and width. And apparently it was possible. And in this way, they gained 2 million euros per year. And then the important question here is, this got up to the CEO, who was very, very angry. Why no one had noticed this before? Well, he could also have said, yeah, okay, very good that we notice it now and that we're gaining 2 million euros per year. But the most important question here is this a large improvement or a small improvement? And in fact, there are no smaller improvements than the ones for which you don't have to change anything to make the improvement. And this is such a case. Problem is that we always look into the 2 million euros, and that very often we see this as an ideal case. We want to win a lot of money with small improvements, while the strength of small improvements is in the continuously keeping on improving. And once in a while, you will have won a jackpot. But if you measure the output of such improvements only by their results, then you will never see the jackpot. This is in fact what they literally said in Japan. Okay, so that was the second one on continuous improvement. Third one, third statement, in my organization, every individual can explain what the strategy of the organization is. When we compare this to the question of value, then we see that the ranking is lower here. So apparently the strategy is more difficult to get to the floor, let's say, or to every employee than the value. This is also something that we very often see. The quote is on the next slide, but apparently only 5% of the people can, according to Harvard Business Review research that has been done, quite a while ago. There is a very easy trick to know this. You go to the floor and ask people to explain the strategy in their own words. And the last thing is very important, because if it's in their own words, it's not what's on the poster, let's say, on the wall, but in their own words, then you know that they understand what it means. And if it's well, also what it means for them and how they can add to this. And we have a small movie to support this. This is what we get if you put people in boxes. Then they start behaving helplessly. This is not what we want, but this is the effect of the fact that it's very difficult to reach people with what the strategy of the organization is, but as well on how to see what the impact is of our work on the next step or the former step in the process, ultimately to the client, to the customer. And an example, it's a typical American example here. To the left is Billy Taylor. It's a rather in OE expert myths. He's a very known guy who can explain EE in a very juicy way. But in his American factory, they had the goal to improve output with 38,000 pieces per year at Goodyear. And this is how they translated it for everyone on their shirt, something typically American, to let everybody feel that they, as an individual, could contribute to that strategy. And it was a very nice program, indeed, where they succeeded. But the most important thing here is that we should think about what drives people and how we can help them in understanding where we want to go as a company, so that the efforts in improvement are directed in one direction and not in all directions. A last statement is the question or the statement: in my organization, leaders see employees as the experts. I see a lot of answers on 4, so a lot of people saying yes, in our organization this is the case, which is a very good thing, because this is the fundamental belief behind humble leadership and behind coaching of people. If you do not fundamentally believe this as a leader, as a boss, as a team leader, whatever, how can you ever develop people to becoming the best they can do and deliver and feel like? So this is a quite fundamental one, and someone who is very known for this is Doc Conant, the former CEO of Campbell's Soup, and he is known for his fundamental belief that you should focus fundamentally on the people working in your organization, and they will win the battle for you in the marketplace. And he was quite known because he traveled around the world a lot to visit all of the sites in his organization, and he wrote more than 30,000 thank you notes just to thank people for the hard work and what they were doing. And this was his behavior, his way of trying to give something back to the people, because he really believed that if he would do so, they would win the marketplace. That it was not his role as CEO to win the marketplace, but that the people would, if they felt fundamental respect for what they were doing. And this is in fact the last story, and then we come back to our first question: what is the difference now in world-class organizations? What do they do different? And different means, how do they get ever increasing performance or results? Not breakthrough steps then falling back, but fundamental improvements over time. And in fact, we have been talking about it during the stories, but in fact, what we fundamentally believe in that if you look at the, how you would call it, the landscape of improvement, you have what they call large bubbles, the improvement projects, and you have the small improvements every day. And in fact, what we see is that too often improvement is focused on the large initiatives. And so we see that there are too many, that we are taking the same resources, but in fact, the drawback of such projects is that they often take more time before they deliver, and often, if you have too many, they never deliver at all or below what you had expected. While the specific reason for doing them is the business case output you want to have. And you plan for that, you have a program management, you have a project management, a portfolio. So in fact, it's quite known how to manage this, but we very often make the mistake that we have too many of those projects. One could say that 3 to 5 fundamental breakthroughs per year or projects are what you should focus on, not more. On the other hand, you have the small, the 1,000 small improvements for one big one. And in fact, the business case between brackets is different here. The business case is not the individual results or individual output, but is in fact the fact that people get committed and that they get engaged, that the culture of sustainability is built by one step at a time. So the output, the ROI, is not the money. The output is the muscles you get into your organization. And the importance here is, if you look back at Chop the Elephant, we will come back on it later, is that you need both. You need large improvement initiatives who bring the money on short term, and you need the muscles that will build sustainability. And in fact, the framework around it, the leadership, the change management support, the communication and so on, is required to bring all those things together. But you need both levels, large as well as the thousands of small ones. And for those who say, yeah, but culture is quite soft, in fact, what you see is that very often KPIs we all know as a performance indicator for doing well or not, but key behavioral indicators are as important. You can make behavior measurable by simple measures. For instance, the number of operator improvement ideas implemented is a better indicator for future success than, for instance, the fact at this point in time you have 0 accidents, which is a typical KPI. It does not necessarily say that next year you will have no accidents. But the number of near misses reported, for instance, is a behavioral indicator which shows to you that people are really feeling that safety is something important in the organization. So the important message is here, you need both large improvement initiatives and thousands of small ones. And you need to focus on both continuously over time. Small improvements are not a phase, but are a permanent way of building sustainability. This is an example of Wrexham. Wrexham has won the Shingo Prize several times. It's one of the few organizations worldwide who sees the highest Shingo level as their norm. They're a former Unilever business unit. They make cans, for instance, for Coca-Cola. What you see here are some of the results for which they got the prize. And the absolute numbers are less important, but what you need to see here is that they keep on improving over years. Most of the charts are 4, 5, 6, 7 years long, and they improve across all domains, as well on safety, as on cost, as on quality, but also, for instance, at the right bottom on stakeholder satisfaction, you see that the satisfaction of the employees here has been increasing from 17% to 85%, for instance, in the same period as the program where you see all those nice results. So the most important message here is, do not focus on one part, do not focus on one output criterion, but make sure that you improve on all layers, which is logic as there is only one culture of performance, not one per type of output category. So what's at the heart of the Shingo framework? I do think that everyone already knows by now, but what we typically see is that we all want to have results, and the way of building those is very often via tools we will be implementing, which are build up out of systems, for instance, a budgeting system, incentive systems, improvement systems, and so on. And this is how we typically create our business, while the most important thing we forget. It are people, even in an automated world of today, it are people by their behavior who create those results using the tools they have. And this is a quite important insight. Culture is not context. Culture is the sum of the behaviors you can observe in your organization. That means that culture can be defined, that you can measure it, that you can coach it, that you can define it. And this is a quite important thing to realize, because this means that this will not work in our culture is not valid. This means you have a current culture and you need to think about what should our culture look like to come to permanent improving results. And the good news here is that we've been talking about the stories which link back to some principles that the Shingo Institute, part of the university in Utah, has done the research on what principles inform that culture. How should the culture look like? It depends not on sector, not on even regional culture. The principles of excellence are always the same. And this is the good news, in fact, is that we don't need to search below the table if there are other cards to poker with. In fact, we know what there is to know. We need to execute it in a disciplined way. And this is the good message, but also the difficult message. There is nothing to find out anymore about enterprise excellence, but still only 10% succeeds. What do we have to do different then? When we come back to the stories we just told, the 10, we're now going to just explain shortly the 10 principles and then go into an interactive part where we'll be defining behaviors together. If you look at the stories, the story of Boston Scientific with the stent is that the first principle is that everybody understands that to create value for the customer, that you're fanatic, everybody knows this, but that you're fanatic in creating value for the customer and that you only focus your efforts on that value-adding work. That's the first. The second one, think about Goodyear, is that all people think and act in the same direction. And this is over time, constancy of purpose. That means from a top management perspective that you need the safety as an organization to go into a certain direction you've chosen and to keep going in that direction. And systemically means that everybody understands how their job, their activity impacts the others in the organization, impacts the customer, impacts suppliers, impacts other colleagues. So the second point is on being aligned. Not the individual initiative is important, but the fact that it's all aligned. Third one you all know, the Barco example, continuous improvement, which is closely linked to what we know in the lean thinking, is about quality at the source, small improvement steps, scientific thinking, a challenging way of leadership to always seek perfection. It's never good enough, and we always strive further. These are the fundamental 5 principles on continuous improvement. And the last one, think about the Campbell's story, cultural enablers, is the lead with humility principle and the respect every individual principle, which appear out of research to be the main motivators for people to go beyond their job and to do something extra, to be truly motivated. If you're not feeling respected, whatever culture you're in, you're not going to give yourself for 100 or 110% for the organization. So those are in fact 4 categories and 10 principles which in fact define cross-sector, cross-country, how an excellence culture looks like. Now this is good news, let's say. Now we know what to do, we can go home and we can start doing it. Trouble is that everyone probably agrees with this. But that doesn't mean that anything will change tomorrow. The only way something will change if you're able to translate these principles into your organization, to define what respect and every individual would mean in your organization, what the behavior would be, and how you would build your systems around it. The other way around. And that's what we're going to do right now, is let us try this. It is a quite difficult exercise, but the question we're going to try to answer together via Slido is to define behaviors based on these principles. And we've done this exercise with hundreds of people. It's apparently a difficult exercise because defining behavior means that we need to be concrete. And concrete in this context means a behavior is literally everything you can see a person doing or saying, or hear a person saying. It's not an emotion, feeling, or attitude. That means someone's angry is not a behavior, but the fact that someone is slamming the door is. If we want to be concrete for behavior, we need to follow a certain syntax, and that syntax would be someone does something in a certain context. Who, a verb, and a context. Please note this down next to you or mentally, because a lot of the things you will be putting into Slido will not be according to this syntax, so I will be asking to you, but can you make it a bit more concrete? For instance, a leader, a team leader for instance, personally thanks an employee for implementing an improvement idea. We can observe this behavior. When you are at the floor and you see someone doing this, you can observe this behavior. That also means that you can coach on it, that you can steer on it. So that's the importance of defining a concrete behavior, is that at that point it becomes coachable and steerable. At that point you're agreeing on something concrete. So this is what we're going to do for some of the categories of the Shingmol. We might take 2 or 3, but keep this in mind, the syntax. And the goal of today is, let's be together a virtual organization, and let's try to define that ideal behavior together. And ideal is suggested by the principles of Shingmol. Ideal means this behavior leads to sustainable results. Okay, let's have a try. Let's take the first one, which is cultural enablers. There are 2 principles: lead with humility and respect every individual. And our question would be to you, please think for a moment on what ideal behaviors would you like to see in your organization regarding, and just for inspiration, how do you involve people? How do you stimulate autonomy? How do you train them? How is a safe environment created? How people are recognized, and so on. What type of behaviors would you expect from the people themselves, from the leaders, and so on, to come to a culture where humility, lead with humility is important, and everyone feels respected? We might show this on the screen a little longer for inspiration, but please have a thought, and please share with us via Slido what kind of behaviors you're thinking about based on this one. So the example was leaders personally thank employees after implementing an improvement is an example in this category. I hear people thinking. Let's consider this as a, okay, we have a first one here. Leaders listen to operators when they propose something. Positive language and coaching someone into an expected standard. Leaders generally taken into account feedback from operators. Leaders assist at the workshop and don't comment. May I ask some input from the person who has put leaders generally taking into account feedback from operators? Can you please raise your hand via the GoToWebinar tool, because I'd like some background on that one. Hello?
Yes, hello.
I'm talking to?
Sigrid.
Hello, Sigrid. Can you please give some background on what do you mean with generally taking into account feedback from operators?
I mean that Sometimes you have certain leaders who more for the form of it, they ask for feedback from people. They don't actually do anything with it. So I mean that if you want to have feedback, you also have to be willing to do something with it.
Okay. And how do I observe to generally take into account feedback? How do I see this?
I think you can see that by people's body language, the way that they are reacting, but also, of course, when they come back to the operators and explain to them how they, what they have done with it.
Okay. So, for instance, a behavior would be the leader comes back with feedback to the input from the operator on the daily meeting, for instance.
Yes, something like that. Yes.
Yeah, it's one of the behaviors that you would see, okay, as generally taken. Okay, thank you. Okay, then I see whoever that sees a violation of any safety rule, wearing safety rule, from whoever making the violation is speaking up. It's can the person who has put this one please raise his hand to give some background on this one.
This is Sami speaking here.
Hello, Sami.
This one is for me. And on the manufacturing work floor, there are a very large number of basic safety rules, like wearing a badge, like wearing safety clothing, like wearing safety shoes. And I have seen in the past that if there is then a delegation of high management or whatever, that they are not always compliant to everything. And if an operator sees that and he or she does not speak up, that would be a bad behavior. So only if really everybody can address everybody on such things, that's a very important behavior.
Yeah, I've seen examples from this. It would be for me a very strong behavior. I've once seen an operator forbidding one of the VPs to enter the area because he was not wearing his PBMs. And the VP was quite angry with this, which is not the desired behavior, but the operator was backed up by the team leader of the area, and these were two very, very strong behaviors in which you see that safety is really, truly something inside the organization. So I think it's a very, very good example here. Okay, thank you. Do we have others? Leaders explain the why of a decision to his operators is a nice one. Operators take initiative to implement improvements on the shop floor. Maybe take initiative to implement improvements. The person who has been answering this one, please raise a hand. No one? My question here would be, to take initiative, how would I see this? Does it mean that I notify this to my team leader? Does it mean that I do an improvement cycle myself? So this one is very close to what we're searching for, but in this case I cannot see it yet physically. I see manage the follow-up of action from workshop and teamwork. Manage is a great word. One can discuss for an hour on what to manage would be. But me, from my part, I still have difficulty with observing management. So manage a follow-up of actions would be to, maybe I can ask it to the person who put it in, maybe can raise your hand. How would we see the management of the follow-up of actions? We can visually put it onto a board, we can put it into an Excel and so on. Some are, or let's say, easier to follow up than others. But the idea behind this is, I think, quite clear. I think they're in a good direction. The message here is, and then we will go over to the next category, is how can you see it? How can you observe it? That means that, think about the safety example. If you see this happen, you can intervene, or you can give positive feedback, or you can comment on it. Okay, let's go to the second one. Let's go over to continuous improvement, Lotte?
Yes.
Okay. So continuous improvement has 5 principles: assure quality at the source, focus on process, which means not on blaming people, embrace scientific thinking, which is small improvement cycles, and seek perfection is the leadership style, which says that you always can keep on improving. We were thinking about things on how to improve quality, on how to improve problem solving structurally, and how can you see there is continuous improvement in your organization. If you would walk through an organization, how would you see it? What type of behavior or behavioral evidence would you see? Everybody is thinking. Leaders systematically using problem-solving tools. First one. The second one is an example of what we call behavioral evidence. PDA cycles on a team board have a follow-up date and an owner. Operator does the quality check of his work himself. This is an interesting one. The person who has put this in, can you please raise your hand? I would like some background to understand this better.
Maar hij is niet in de call, tenzij het bevredigd is.
This is Dimitri Delayer speaking. Hi.
Hello, Dimitri. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
You said operator does the quality check of his work himself. What do you mean by this?
When he delivers his work, that he uses well a checklist or whatever of all his common sense to check if what he delivered is according what the expectations were, for example.
Okay.
But he does it himself.
Why would he do it himself? Why not a quality department or a quality assurance guy or girl? Or?
Because he gets the feedback of if something is wrong directly, and he can make a correction himself.
Yeah, super. This is one that goes way back. It was in fact the first idea that Toyota implemented in the 50s when they entered automotive. The idea of checking your own work and learning from it. So it's quite a very powerful example, yet not often practiced. So thanks for the comment. I see another one. Thank you, Dimitri. I see another one. Leaders organizing daily performance dialogues. Maybe some explanation on what this means and why this would be or create ideal behavior. Who has put this in? Hello? Hello?
Well, bye.
Noel, are you there? No, I don't hear Noel. Yeah, it's quite an interesting one here. One of the important things here is that if you look at continuous improvement, the logic of daily routines is quite important. Right? So the daily here is quite an important one, because if you take too long to consider the work you've done or the performance you've had, in this case from the day before, it is very difficult to reflect upon it or to take corrective actions or root cause analysis. So one of the fundamental behaviors in organizations that are truly going in this direction, a world-class direction, is that they never stop doing this. Whatever crisis, they always keep on having those daily team meetings and looking at those small improvements. There is never a reason not to. And this is in fact a fundamental reason, because there's always a good reason to take troubleshooting first. You see excellence when people take the long term first in those small steps daily. So this is a quite nice one. Make things done after planned, PDCA. Who has put this in? This might require some background. Someone? Or the latter one, a clear grasp of the current situation. Who has put this in? Can you please raise your hand? Nobody? Everybody has gotten afraid of raising his hand. A clear grasp of the current situation is an essential principle. It is not a behavior. So my question would be, and maybe we can all think about this one. So let's go further on. A clear grasp of the current situation. What type of behaviors do we see if an organization has a clear grasp of the current situation? What behaviors do we see of which we would say this organization has a clear grasp of the current situation? This is the difficulty of the exercise. We all know that a clear grasp of the current situation is something we really need. Operators discuss their job in group after it's finished to see what can be better the next time. Very good example. Another. Very good behavior. Yeah. Operators, so the people on the floor, in group after it's finished, so direct, and to see which I would think is a reflection to, let's say, visual management also. We discuss figures, not opinions, during the daily meeting. Is an example of having a clear grasp of the current situation. An operator can directly explain what red means on the visual board. An operator or someone in the commercial department has a clear idea of the current status of production planning. Would be an example of having a grasp of the current condition throughout different departments. Okay. Leaders go to the floor for problem solving when a problem has occurred, which means that my behavior as a leader would be I go to the floor and together with people I'm going to see what the root cause could be and potential solutions. Those are all behaviors that link to a clear grasp of the current situation. Okay. Operator explains the job by showing a standard is also a very, very mature one. I must say that we don't often see this. It's quite a known one, but it's a very strong one. I'm looking at the time and I'm looking at what I think that we. No, one last one. Okay. Okay. Thank you for this input. We're going to take a last category, which would be let's take results, value for the customer. What ideal behaviors would you like to see in your organization? How do we make product and client knowledge alive in our organization? How are stakeholders managed? How do we bring the customer in? What behaviors, think about the story at Boston Scientific, would we expect of everyone to make sure that each one of us understands how his or her jobs adds to creating value for the customer? And what do we do when we know? You can have some examples here on the screen also. So what behaviors? We often see that this is a rather difficult one, although it should be the easiest one because we only exist as a company when our customers pay. What behavior can we show to make sure that we all understand what brings value for the customer? And how do we act upon it? We have the first one. Operator goes to the customer to explain the results and finding of the job. This requires some background. Who has put this one in? Please raise your hand. Dimitri?
This is Dimitri once again.
Yes, hello, Dimitri.
Well, what I meant is that the one who has done the job goes directly to the customer to give some explanations or to discuss his findings, and not pushing it in the line to do the explanations. So a direct feedback loop between the one who is executing and the customer.
Okay, and the context you're talking from is for the other listeners?
In a maintenance environment.
In a maintenance environment. Okay, yeah, I do think that what you're stressing is the direct link. I do think this is a quite important one for the customer, in this case production, I think, and the operator side. This is a very good one. Thank you. Management sharing customer complaints with all employees. Please raise your hand who has put this one in. This is also an interesting one. Hello? So management sharing customer complaints with all employees. What is the background, or how do you see this concretely?
Technical problems.
Technical problem. Yeah. This is also an interesting one because it gives a direct feedback on the quality of work. Something that is interesting to see is that we more often think, when we talk about customers, we very often think about complaints. We less often think about the positive feedback cycle. While normally, if we deliver good quality, there should be more examples of positive quality than negative quality. But both feedback cycles are quite important, and the fact that we say with all employees is interesting. My question here would be, how do you share this in a way that this has impact? You could say we do this during the daily meeting in a visual way. We ask input for root cause analysis for a complaint on the day after, for instance. So it's a very good reflex here. The above one is an interesting, discussing and not blaming about bad results. Who? Please raise your hand. Who has put this one in?
So this is
Hello? Hello? Sami, can
I think I
yeah.
I think I spoke for my turn because mine is the longer one. But
okay, please explain. Yeah, please explain the longer one then. Thank you.
The one that I'm saying is, if you set KPIs or results or whatever, that often if the result is not meeting what was the target, you see people trying to explain why it is like that and why it could not be better. And if you see that kind of behavior, this is no good. So I want to see behavior that people, whatever the KPI shows, the dashboard, is focusing on what can be improved.
Yeah, yeah. And I would link it to the discussing and not blaming about bad results. There are two things here. If you discuss about the bad result, then it's to find the root cause and a potential action. That's what you want to say on improving. And not blaming about bad results. This is one of the worst behaviors you can ever see. When we were at Toyota in Japan, they were telling about the worst accident in the last 10 years, and we were all thinking that that would be about people who died or something, and the behavior they had observed was someone had done an Andon pull on the line, so had asked for help, and the team leader had yelled to the operator. And for them, this was the worst behavior they could see in their organization, because all of their results are built on the fact that everybody helps attain that quality and that result. And the moment that we start blaming people, then we get back in our old behavior, which was also the case in Japan before, is when I make an error, I try to cover it up instead of seeing it as as a learning opportunity. So this would be one of the most important behaviors possible, because this creates the safe environment, mentally safe environment, to speak up and say, this has not gone well, how can we improve it? This is something that is known, and I think we all agree on this, but 9 out of 10 times we don't see this behavior in an organization. It's a very difficult one to get this outside your own behavior. Okay. Okay, I think I see some good team members from a technical help desk go to the customer to ask for his expectations regarding lead times, which is a clear one to go out to the customer and not just oblige, let's say, to KPIs. You could also say we go to a Gemba walk at our customer's organization instead of the other way around. We often have audits of a customer, but it's less often that we go see at the customer's place. We could also say that I see here one on achieving the target condition at every step of the value chain. This is one that I'm intrigued by. Who has raised this one? Or who could raise his hand on this one? Tony.
Yeah, this is about. Hi again.
Right.
This is about making sure that we achieve what we set out to achieve. So this is a follow-on from the last question, whereby the direction is what we're aiming for, but the condition within that direction is what we're trying to attain.
Okay, and how would you make this into? How would you bring this into behavior? I think it's a quite important one to bring it in each step. What type of behavior would you see in parallel of this?
The behavior would be the actual attaining the target condition of the sort of single point lesson, so the visual standard. So it was clear that what you were doing was in line with that single point lesson.
Yeah. So there would also might be a link to kata coaching, for instance.
Yeah. If there was any deviation from that standard, that would then that would then bring out the need for the positive coaching.
Okay, super. Yeah, this is a strong one. Thank you. I see a last one, which is, I think, explaining itself. Manager invites the customer to explain his need to the operator. I do think this is an important one to make sure that we directly understand, which is very often an issue in large organizations. We don't feel the customer anymore directly. We're only doing a part of the task of the process, which may take it, in a small organization, this is implicit that you have customer contact, which is often not the case in larger organizations. So this one is a good behavior, let's say, to bring this customer back in the organization, for instance. It's not unseen that people work 20 years in an organization and never have talked to a customer, or didn't see the customer needs evolve and are still acting as if the customer would want something that he wanted 10 years ago. And this is a typical behavior you see when people do not get feedback of the customers in their own job, which, and I will say it again, is the prime reason for intrinsic motivation. If you do not feel what it adds up to, why would you be motivated? Okay, I do think, or I would hope that the idea of the exercise is clear. What I see here was quite a good example. Very often we have more difficulty in defining behaviors, and I would say from what was on the screen, 1 out of 2 was, let's say, really observable behavior. And it is, in fact, if you get at that point, that it gets tangible. At that point, you can make it alive in your organization. And in what we did here are some small tips and tricks to define that behavior. The first one we already discussed. It can be observed, registered, and measured. So managers are friendly is not a behavior, but say good morning to the employees every day by shaking their hand is a behavior. Secondly, if you can choose between positive ideal behaviors and negative ones, choose for the positive one. They have a much more positive effect on people. Instead of one of the things we saw during one of these workshops was demote badly performing managers. A positive behavior would be help and coach managers who struggle with their responsibilities. So if you can define a negative one, it's also possible to define a positive one, and then that one has more effect on people's behavior. Behavior should also be defined on all levels in the organization. That means literally from the CEO to the employee level, so that everybody can recognize. And very often when we start this exercise in organizations, we have the feeling that that behavior should be really different on each of the levels. But once you go deeper, you see that there is much more convergence. The leadership style that is behind it, the behavior, the culture behind this, is in fact 8 out of 10 behaviors can be applied on all functions, you could see. And you can make them a bit more concrete in the context specifically, but once you go deeper, you see that those behaviors are not that dependent on the level you're working in. Of course, the activities are different, but the way of executing excellence is not that different. So this is, in fact, good news, but it's important that everybody feels this and it's defined for all levels. Otherwise, you will get, yeah, but I need to be standing up during a meeting and talking on a visual board, and the management is in the boardroom with Excels and a nice presentation and a coffee. If you feel that sharing results in a visual way, stand-up meeting-wise, there is in fact no reason why you can't apply this to all levels in the organization. A director meeting can be as well stand-up and visual as, let's say, a shop floor meeting. Be clear on what kind of behavior you want to see and expect. Because when you're clear, feedback on that behavior has also a bigger mandate. As long as it's not clear what we expect from each other, it's very difficult to give feedback peer-to-peer, or let's say an operator that says, okay, dear VP, you cannot enter because you're not wearing your PBMs. It's only if you feel that it's clear what behavior you want that you can start act upon it, and also giving feedback on it. And it's that giving feedback that's the first thing you start seeing when things are clear in an organization. And it's only when you can give open feedback to each other that you can start improving. It's very often overseen that the basic treat of giving feedback is one of the most important things and most often overseen things in an organization. And of course, when you talk about humble leadership, to give a simple example, someone comes to us and says, yeah, we want to set up an operational excellence program. We think that 5S is a good thing to start with. One can discuss on that latter one, but it's not per se a bad idea. And if you then ask the question, where should we start? Very often a part of the organization is named. And when you then ask, why wouldn't we start in your own desk, to give the example, depending on the output of that question, on the answer, you very often know already if the program will succeed. So it's all about example behavior. That means if you want to set up such a program, such a journey, such a, let's say, going to a new culture, and you don't believe fundamentally that you as an individual needs to change or needs to lead that change, you will not get there anyhow. Think about the main reasons why this fails. The true belief, but also the true knowledge is quite important here. Okay, so example behavior is always an important leadership aspect, but it is surely one of the most important ones here. Everybody knows this, but still when you're at the floor, the first things we hear of employees is, yes, you're now coming by, but in fact, it's the first time we see that someone comes to the floor to ask our opinion, then it's not a good start of a program. This is what you daily should do as a leader also. So a lot of things we know. The question is, how do we bring that intention or that belief to behavior? We were lately at a supplier event where in a project-driven organization where let's say the integrator and suppliers were together, and we asked the question, who would think that a project review after a project would be a good idea? And almost 90% of the people raised their hands. I think there were 200 people in the room. And when we then asked, of the last 100 projects, how often did you do a project review? Only 5 or 6 raised their hand. And this is the difference between intention and behavior. And when you're doing such a program, intention is important, but as such doesn't bring a result. Intention only doesn't bring a result. So question is, when will you change your intention to behavior, and what kind of routines, and those routines are important, can we bring in the organization to make sure that we sustain that behavior? Quite importantly also, we talked about this, I'm not going to go into the metrics in detail, but we discussed it, or I mentioned it several times. Once you know the principles and you've translated them to behaviors for your organization, for instance, leaders personally thank employees for their contribution to a project, you can start thinking on what kind of systems, which would be organizational systems, that can be self-steering teams, this can be incentive systems, this can be organization structures, processes, and so on. What kind of systems do we need to support this kind of behavior? So in fact, we're going to think the other way around. Instead of saying, okay, we're going to implement the system, and then we're going to apply, between brackets, change management, which would mean we already thought this through, and whatever happens, we're going to change your behavior. You think the other way around. You say, what type of culture and behavior do you want to see? And you build your organization around it. An example would be, you define as behavior that that operators or employees think, let's say, think together and put improvement ideas into practice weekly. Together is an important word there, but on the other hand, you have an incentive system which gives a financial benefit to an individual. This is not a hypothetical example I'm giving, it's a real example. So on the one hand, you say, okay, we want people to work together and to work together on improvement, and on the other hand, you say we have an incentive system that gives a financial benefit to the one that puts the idea in the system. You don't have to be an intellectual, in Dutch, big light, which is not English, to understand that this is not working, but you often see this. And then we say, yes, but our system, we cannot get rid of it, so, but can't we find a workaround for this? So this is quite important. If you say, okay, we believe in fundamentally in continuous improvement, then you have to build systems and routines around it to create that ideal behavior. Same thing goes for results, same thing goes for enterprise excellence. So important here is, and this is fundamental, turn it around. First the principles and the behaviors, and then only the systems and the tools. When you chop up the elephant, which is a quite known example to say if you want to do a large project, put it into smaller pieces. But when you chop up the elephant in an operational excellence implementation, he dies. He dies as the elephant would die himself. But the idea here is you cannot piecemeal an implementation. You can do pilots, and then, let's say, use the oil stain principle to spread it throughout the organization. But if you start with one aspect, for instance, a 5S implementation, or you start with daily performance dialogues, but you have not trained or coached the team leaders, or you have no improvement process in place where you can put the actions in, then in fact nothing will happen. And that's what we very often see. So what is quite important here is, if you start implementing, do it in small, in full. Make sure that all the aspects are there to make it happen. Do it in a small team, in a small environment that you can do safe testing on, but do not piecemeal an implementation in small parts, because it only works when everything goes together. 10 principles, you cannot cherry pick 2 or 3 of them and then start implementing. You can say, let's do it in small, but you need to take them all. Leadership, as well as the routines of continuous improvement, of enterprise alignment, and the value for the customer, those 10 principles need to be there from the start. Not for the whole organization, but make sure that you do not piecemeal it. That's one of the main reasons why this fails. Okay. Then, as a latter one, because then we go to the Q&A. Just for your inspiration, we often did this type of workshop more in, let's say, a live session within organizations. You can do this if you use the World Café technique with as many people as you want. We did it with 200 to 250 people at once, and it still gives a kind of focused output if you use the World Café technique. So this would be an interesting way to bring this thinking inside your organization. And also something that might be interesting if you're interested in the behavior aspect is that in a few weeks the Shingo conference is in Brussels, which is quite exceptionally. So please all be invited for the conference itself, which is on October 17 and 18, or for the more in-depth training on October 19 and 20, where the second day of the training will be a Gemba training, like for instance the Boston Scientific example, and in our case this will be at Volvo Trucks. Okay. Then a last one to you. We still have a bit more than 10 minutes left. We did some of the definition of ideal behaviors, but our question to you, and you can fill them in via
Go to webinar.
Yeah, go to
questions.
Yeah. Do you have any questions on this way of thinking or definition of behavior or any other topic that you want to address?
If you have a question, please use the questions box, enter them and send them, and then we will reply to them.
Any burning or non-burning questions? Hello?
Well, Bailey is saying sometimes we have difficulties to determine key performance behaviors measurable.
So the question of Noel was, sometimes we have difficulty in making those key behaviors measurable. I do think this is recognizable. It's recognizable because we just experienced how difficult it is to define key behaviors, and on the second hand, it's if it's difficult to define key behaviors, it's making them measurable is also difficult. What is important here, what we think is that it's important that the process of measuring is not more difficult than, let's say, the process of doing the behavior. I'm going to give an example. If you say, I find it quite important that leaders or managers do Gemba walks, which is one of the key behaviors of leaders within this type of environment, then you could also say, for instance, we want to have something on how many Gemba walks are we doing and what would be the output of it, for instance, a key question or a key observation or something. And we've observed sometimes that if the process of measuring or putting in those observations is too heavy, that people stop doing Gemba walks. This is, of course, not what we want. On the other hand, you could say, if we have something very easy, for instance, a small ticket on which to write, and you put it into a post box next to your visual management board, this is a quite easy process, and you reflect upon it only for 1 minute. And in the same way, you can measure, in this case, the number of Gemba walks completed in a very easy way. And it's still focusing the behavior on what you want, that people observe and ask questions on the floor. And so you have a number of those key behaviors, like Gemba walking is an important one, number of improvement ideas implemented is certainly one that is showing important behavior. On quality, you can have some. The most important thing here, I do think, is that you limit the number and that you do think about behaviors that have a leading character. For instance, in a safety context, the number of near misses reported is a good one, but don't take 5 then. Only take 1 and focus on it. And whenever you measure, always go to the floor to validate the observation also. So there is never a measurement system that can replace your own observation also, I would say.
I will also want to give a comment on this one. What you often do in processes when something goes wrong is applying the 5 times why, and going to go back to the root cause of the problem. The same thing can be done with a KPI. Go to the root cause of this KPI. What drives this KPI? If you, for example, have cost per unit, maybe the reason why cost per unit is high is because there are a lot of quality issues, or okay, is there then quality at the source or problems find soon enough in the problem? Maybe that's something. And then the positive behavior would be that employees, the behavior show that they stop the process, or that they call the team leader or their boss when they see a non-conformity, and then you start measuring that. Find a way to measure what the root causes of a certain KPI. So use also the 5 times why technique on your KPIs to go back to the root cause, and this is often then the leading indicator you actually want to measure.
Thank you for the comment, Lotte. Are there any other questions?
Another question is, how do I tackle non-believers at the management level?
How do I tackle, or do you tackle non-believers in the management team? I would say this is always the case, so I've never experienced a situation in which this is not the case. 2 things there. First, your power sponsor in the management team, at least 1 person should be fully convinced at the start, because only 1, and preferably your power sponsor, because if you start up such a program, it requires effort and a long-term focus. Someone in the management team should say, I will be fully supporting this with my own behavior and my own engagement. If you don't have that situation, it will probably not work. The level of management, I once heard a vice president say, you need the level where the resources are kept or are, let's say, assigned. This is the lowest level you need. Secondly, people at the management level are often not convinced by just saying so. The best technique is bringing them in environments with peers where they can see how it can be in another context in which they can recognize. So the best technique, it's not always working, but the best technique is to bring them into an inspiring environment and preferably let them discuss with their peers who are in the same situation as they are and show a different behavior in the way they lead. So this would be for me the most powerful technique, although most top managers are only convinced once you see results, which is a bit like a catch-22. That's why you need at least 1 person who is fully engaged, so you can start off and you can start showing results, and you often see that people on board during the journey. But the best technique is peer-to-peer for a top management level. Hope this was an answer. Are there any other questions? What I see, it's 5-2. No other questions, and I'm going to thank everyone for your input and your interaction. And as Lotte has said, we will of course send the recording. We will probably also ask for your feedback on how the webinar went, because we also want to improve. And if you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to send them to us, and we will try to answer them. Thanks a lot, and enjoy the afternoon.